Now we're going to focus on the oceans and ocean zones. There are five basic oceans or modern day oceans. We have the Arctic, which is near the North Pole, the Atlantic, which is at the US eastern seaboard. We have the Pacific, which is at the west coast United States. We have the Indian Ocean, which connects Africa and India and Australia. And then we have the Southern Ocean, which encompasses the Antarctic or South Pole. So as we can see, the Arctic Ocean at the top, Southern or Antarctic area at the bottom. We have the Pacific on the west coast of the US and South America, and then Atlantic on the east coast. So the Atlantic is between the US or the Americas and Africa. Now we're going to be talking about the ocean zones, as the ocean doesn't just go from the surface deep, but it's going to go from the shoreline out to the open ocean. So we're going to start with shoreline to open ocean. Closest to the coast is going to be the intertidal zone, so also known as the coastal zone. The intertidal zone is going to be very shallow. This is going to be and can be divided into the upper, middle, and lower parts or zones. Then we're going to move into the neritic zone, and this is more of a shallow marine environment that pretty much extends from low water to about 200 meters deep. So this is about 650 feet deep. And this pretty much covers the area of the continental shelf. Now, when we move to the oceanic zone, this goes beyond the continental shelf, and this gets very, very deep. So the oceanic zone basically is the area of the ocean lying beyond the continental shelf, extending out to the depths of the ocean. Okay, so we're moving away from the coast, away from the continental shelf, and this basically covers any water that goes below the 200 meters or the 650 feet. So it goes a lot deeper than that. So remember, we are going not deep, but we are going seaward from the coast. So anything that drops below that 200 meters out into the ocean, that's the oceanic zone. So we are going away from the coast. So intertidal, neritic, which is your continental shelf, then oceanic zone. Now we do have the benthic zone, which basically covers all the area below that. So technically it's covering the bottom of all interlying zones of the intertidal, neritic, and oceanic. So the benthic zone covers all underlying zones. It's basically the lowest ecological zone in any body of water. And it's usually going to contain sediments at the seafloor, which are going to also provide nutrients for the organisms in this zone. So it's pretty much covering the bottom of all zones. So here we have the intertidal zone at the coast. Here we have the neritic zone, and as you can see, it's kind of focusing on this continental shelf here before it really drops down. Oceanic zone, it drops deep. We push out into the ocean, and then the benthic zone is basically all of that sedimentary, all of that ground floor underneath all the ocean parts. So as we said, the intertidal zone is an area between the high tide and low tide. It's at the coast. We have a lot of organisms that can be adapted to the change in tides. So we have like maybe clams and crabs, some of these animals that can be adapted to this change of environment. The neritic zone, we said, is the area covering the continental shelf. And basically the continental shelf is the portion of the continent, remember continent, continental, that is underwater. So this is basically usually going to be the portion that is going to have shallow water. So it's not necessarily at the coast, but it is going to be more of a shallow water, and it's going to be also known as the shelf sea. So this is between the shoreline and the shelf break, or when it really drops. So there's not a big noticeable drop in the continental shelf. So once we drop dramatically, that's past the continental shelf. In this area, the continental shelf or the neritic zone, we have the greatest density and diversity of marine life. So most animals are going to be living in the neritic zone. Then we have the oceanic zone, and that's from the continental shelf out to the open ocean. And as we said, the benthic zone underlies all other zones at the bottom of the ocean, so the ocean floor. Now as we move from coast out to the ocean, now let's look at, instead of horizontal, let's now look at vertical, which is the surface of the ocean to the ocean floor. So basically, we're going to focus and divide this up into 3 parts, but there's also going to be subcategories. The first part, which is at the surface, is the photic zone. Photic means light. This is where the sun, this is where light is going to hit the surface. Majority of life is going to be here. So at the coastal areas where light can hit the ground, where plants and different things can grow, you also have a lot of sea life living in this area. Now, another name for the photic zone, so if you use different resources, they may use photic zone, but they may also use the littoral zone. They may use euphotic zone. They may use epipelagic zone or sunlight zone. So you do need to be aware of all 5 of these different names. And the photic zone basically focuses from the top of the water down to about 200 meters. And then when we get to that area of 200 meters, we start losing light. And this is then going to move into the aphotic or dysphotic, meaning no light zone. So less light, it's a lot darker, and of course, the deeper you go, the darker it's going to get. We're going to divide the aphotic zone into 2 parts. The mesopelagic zone, meso meaning middle, so this is like 200 to 1,000 meters deep. And then once we hit the 1,000 meters, we're going to refer to the bottom part of the aphotic zone as the bathypelagic zone. This is about 1,000 to 4,000 meters deep. Then as we reach that area of 4,000 meters deep, generally around that area, we're going to get to the abyssal zone. And this is extremely dark, hardly any life in this area. And basically, we're going to divide it into 2 parts again, into the abyssal pelagic zone, which is 4,000 to 6,000 meters deep, and the hadopelagic zone. So you can think about Hadal like Hades down at the bottom. So this is 6,000 to 10,000 meters deep. So we can kind of see we have at the very surface, you can see it says photic zone on the right. Then we have the aphotic. Then it's going to be dividing that aphotic into the meso and bathypelagic zones. And then we have the abyssal and hadopelagic zones. And here's a better little picture in which you can see the epipelagic, meso, bathyl, abyssal, and hadal. Now remember, the meso and bathypelagic are the aphotic zones, while the abyssal zones include the abyssopelagic and hadopelagic zones. And if you look at the right side, you can also see, as it was going horizontal, the intertidal zones. And in this picture, you can see the low tide zone, middle tide zone, and high tide zones. And you can see where life would, with the sea stars, and the crabs, and the clams and oysters, and hydra, these different little things would have to adjust when it's low tide versus high tide. Will they have to move? What will happen to their home? And so forth. Again, you can see a different visual dividing up the different parts. You can see the drop of the continental shelf here. You can see the pelagic or littoral zone or aphotic zone. You can see the bathyl or euphotic zone. And then as it goes down deep, we go down to the abyssal zone. Now, there's 3 basic types of ocean life. There's plankton, nekton, and bathos. The plankton is going to be divided into phytoplankton, which is primarily plant-like. These are going to be your producers like algae or different protists. Then you have your zooplankton. Think of zoo, think of animals. These are your consumers. Then you have your nekton, which are your free swimmers. And we're going to talk about some examples of those. And then your benthos. Basically, these either live at or near the bottom, and these are primarily your bottom of the ocean, the ground floor, filter feeders, or scavengers. So here's your phytoplankton, which we said are like algae. This can include cyanobacteria, diatoms, which you've learned before, dinoflagellates, your zooplankton, think of animals. This is like your jellyfish, your crabs, your crayfish, your arthropods, your different larvae, your cnidarians, like your, as I said, jellyfish or hydra, your comb jellies. And then you have your nekton, which are your free swimmers. This includes reptiles such as sea turtles, mammals such as dolphins and whales, fish such as sharks, and all the different bony fish out there. Then we have mollusks such as octopi and squid. But then we have the benthos, which are the bottom dwellers, the scavengers. We have two types of those. Those are the sessile benthos, which are going to be non-moving. Sessile means non-moving. These are usually attached to the bottom, such as your coral, your sea anemones, your clams, your oysters, or your sponges. Now, oysters and clams can move around a little bit, but primarily they're going to stay, maybe dig around, maybe move with their muscular foot, but primarily they're not going to be doing a lot of movement. Then you have your vagrant, which are your movers at the bottom. These are more of your little scavengers, which would be including the crabs, the sea stars, your little starfish, sea cucumbers, and sea urchins. And if you've ever seen some of the videos of the sea stars moving around, walk around using their tubed feet, they will move around on their bottom of the ocean, on the bottom of the ocean, and eat up any fish that maybe have dropped at the bottom or anything that's dead. So again, as we will soon prepare for a review project, you can see the photic, aphotic, and abyssal zone going down. So this is a great slide, breaking it up. Then you have your intertidal, neritic, and oceanic zone. And then as we said, the benthic realm or zone is basically the ocean floor covering all or under all bodies of water.